Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining. This is the Oracle AI Autonomous Database Learning Lounge. I am Marcos Senasibi, a part of the product management team for our Autonomous AI Database. And today we're going to have a very special session. We're going to be talking about security, but also data safe. So data safe comes included with the Autonomous Database, and you're going to learn all about it from Bettina Schäumer. She joins us today, and she's going to be talking about, security assessment, configuration drift detection, sensitive data discovery. We're going to be talking also about data masking, right, for all those great AI trainings that you need, and also activity auditing, user risk monitoring as well, right? And finally, she's going to close with SQL Firewall policy management. Throughout the session, we're going to have product managers looking at any questions that come up. So if you have a question, please make sure to type it in the Q&A in Zoom, okay? We're going to be looking into those questions and answering them there. If you need to come back and watch this recording, it's going to be posted in here in that link, okay? And then speaking of links, these are the important links to bookmark. I'm sharing those links right now with you in chat, okay? So take a look at those links, and then you have getting started with Autonomous. You have lots and lots of learning lounge, right? So, the LiveLabs. You have more than 37, I think 37 LiveLabs that we have there right now. And then you can join us on LinkedIn and also take a look at the developers Slack channel. So Oracle has a developers Slack channel that is open, so you can just register yourself there and ask your questions directly into the channel there, and also watch the entire channel for news and things like that. Okay. All right. So right before I give you guys to Bettina, I just wanted to ask you guys how familiar you are with DataSafe. So I'm just asking right now how familiar you are with DataSafe. So that helps Bettina also understand your level of knowledge, right, about the tools. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you again for joining, and take it away.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let me share my screen here. So for everyone who's not that familiar with DataSafe, obviously I'm going to talk more about what is DataSafe, but Marcus specifically also invited me to talk about, what can we do to really protect your AI workloads that you might run on your autonomous databases. So I'll cover that as well. And then also at the end, I'm also talking about what other tools do you have available for your autonomous databases that are coming out of the box, so to speak, and are included with your autonomous database besides DataSafe. Good, with that, let's get started. So Bettina Schäumer, I'm part of the product management team here for database security and responsible for DataSafe. Basically, since we launched it now actually 7 years ago. So leading DataSafe since then. Good, but coming to our topic. So obviously, over the last few years, we've seen tremendous focus on AI, right? New AI workloads that are coming, AI adoption, if it's with agents or, other processes that you might implement. But if you think about AI obviously doesn't create value on its own. It creates really value when it's accessing enterprise data. And your enterprise data obviously is most of the time, stored in databases. So we really need to also focus on data security. How do we protect the database security when you're using AI features? So that really means AI security also is a data security challenge. And if we, for instance, don't know where sensitive data resides, we can then not govern how AI uses it, right? If your access control is too broad, then AI can amplify data exposure, right? So we have to take care of that as well. If your activity is not monitored, then AI increases risk at, machine speed, right? Because now with Gen AI attacks and so on, everything is doubled or, tripled or, multiplied by the risk factor as well. And then if you have sensitive data in your non-productive environments, if you're using them for, training AI models or for development and so on, then obviously your non-productive AI environments also become liabilities because they might expose data that is, not supposed to be exposed here. So that's why securing AI workloads really starts with securing your databases, right? That contain that information that is so most valuable for your organization. And that also means we're seeing new security requirements that we have to address. So if you think about where sensitive data resides, right? How, what sensitive data does AI have access to, right? If it's an AI application or any regular application that you have, you need to know where that data is stored, right? Who is allowed to access that data, right? Do you have typical users? Do you have AI service accounts, AI agents that now access the data? How can you monitor the usage of the data, right? Who has access to it? Who did access the data? What type of access happened on your data, and so on. And then also, as we just talked about, you need to protect your non-productive environments, right? You need to make sure you're not exposing any information, any sensitive information in those non-productive environments that might not be as tightly secured as your productive environments. And obviously, you also need to think about how do you reduce the risk of misuse or attack, right, on your data. So these requirements are not necessarily new, but AI makes them more important because access happens at a much larger scale now, at a much larger speed. And the good news is that these are exactly the type of challenges that DataSafe was designed to address. And if we look at, those requirements, they translate into, basically, objectives of what you want to do. You want to know where sensitive data is stored. You want to protect sensitive data and so on. And what I'm trying to do here is also give you an insight on, which capabilities within DataSafe can address that, right? So it starts with sensitive data discovery, right? Here, it helps you identify and classify where you store sensitive information in your database, right? Which schema, which tables, which columns store sensitive information. Then we have user assessment that helps you answer the question of who are my highly privileged users, who has access to the data, who are risky accounts, do we have any excessive permissions for my users or for my AI agents? And then when it comes to auditing, so activity auditing then provides visibility into how data is being used, helping you monitor access patterns, investigate any suspicious activity. When it comes to AI development or testing environments, data masking enables the use of realistic data without, as I mentioned before, exposing the actual sensitive information that is stored in your productive environment. And then when it comes to attack surface, if you we have security assessment and SQL Firewall that help you reduce this attack surface by identifying risky configurations that might lead to unnecessary risk and introducing or basically having attackers trying to get those data right or using those misconfigurations. And then also by restricting unauthorized SQL activities on your database. And finally, we have target groups and security policies that I also will talk about later that help you, apply any controls consistently across your database fleets, whether they're running in the cloud, on premises, or if you have hybrid environments. And then together, these capabilities provide the visibility, the governance, the monitoring, and really protection you need for databases supporting AI workloads. And I'm going to talk more about all these different capabilities that I have listed here in the coming slides, obviously. One more thing on DataSafe, obviously, we have those 6 capabilities here. And as I mentioned, we'll talk more about it. Obviously, you're mostly care about your autonomous databases. That's why you're here in the webinar. But I just wanted to make sure you understand. So DataSafe can be used for all flavors of the Oracle database. So if you have your autonomous databases running in OCI or any other cloud database in OCI, DataSafe can support them. If you have any databases running in our multi-cloud partnerships, if you have Oracle databases at Azure, at AWS, or at Google Cloud Platform, they're supported. And also, if you have on-premises databases, you can support them with DataSafe. And then basically we give you, you register your target database, and we'll talk more about that. And then we give you immediate insights into any risk we have found around the configuration of your data, the users who are accessing the database, and then the data and the sensitivity of the data that is stored in the database. Now, if you think about database security, it becomes even more important, obviously, when you don't have to just secure one database or, 2 or 3 databases, but typically you have a whole fleet of databases and you need to manage security across the board, right? You really want to make sure that your compliance is consistent across all these different targets that you have, that you're reducing risk and human errors, and basically that you're protecting sensitive data across your fleet. And if you think about your databases, they might have different requirements, right? You might have some mission critical applications or other business applications. You might have development applications, or you might have really regulated data with HIPAA data or so. So your security requirements and how strict you have to be with those settings or so might differ depending on what type of database we're talking about. So let's assume we have, different groups of databases. We have mission critical databases, as I mentioned. You have other business applications, and you have development databases. If you think about what you need to enable or configure on your database for database security, right? You have audit policies, and they might be very strict for your mission critical databases, right? Where you track it's exactly what, certain users are doing or what certain data is accessed and so on. You have other production databases, also pretty strict audit policies maybe, but maybe they differ because you have different regulations you have to follow for your mission critical databases versus your other business applications. And you might have less strict policies for your development databases, right? Then if you think about how long you want to keep your audit records, right? For mission critical databases, again, you might have to follow certain regulations. You might have to keep your audit records for a certain number of years. Maybe you have to keep them. There are regulations where you have to keep your audit records for 7 years. Maybe your other business applications, you only have to keep them for 3 years. And then development databases, what we typically see is customers keep them maybe for 12 months or 6 months, but they don't need to keep them for, many, many years. And the same goes with, what are these assessment checks? What are the compliance checks you want to do? You might have to be CIS compliant for your mission critical databases or all your production databases. You might have other requirements for development databases or less requirements for development databases. So you can specify that, or you might have to specify that, for these group of targets. And then when it comes to monitoring, you want to monitor if you have any configuration drift in any of those databases. And yes, you can do that per database group, or you can look at it for the entire fleet of your databases. Same goes with if you find any non-compliant findings, anything is, let's say, not CIS compliant or STIC compliant, you want to look at that for your entire fleet. Same goes with where sensitive data is stored, mass data, in your non-productive environments. And then also you want to monitor database activity and any SQL violations you might have. So as you see, there might be different requirements depending on what type of database you have. And for that, we introduced what we call target database groups. So you can define, what are my groups? So it could be certain applications, or as I said, production database. It could be as simple as production databases versus non-production databases. It could be, hey, these are my databases with regulated data. These are the databases that don't have the regulated data. It could be based on the application that runs on top. So basically, maybe having a target group for all your EBS applications versus other applications and so on. So with target groups, we give you flexible conditions here. So you can decide, which targets should be grouped together based on their security requirements. And then we give you flexible conditions where you can create that based on compartments the databases are in or tags, or you can also select, specific databases. And then if you're adding new target databases, let's say with any of those conditions, we're adding them automatically to the right target groups as well. And then I'll talk more about that, but these target groups then can be used across all of the data safe features that I'm going to talk about later. Good. The first feature that I would like to talk about is database security assessment. So here, it's really about making sure that your configuration is not introducing any unnecessary risk, right? If you think about an Oracle database, there are probably hundreds of settings that can impact the security of your database. So what we're doing here with security assessment is we have a very comprehensive list of checks where we're going through all the different configurations that might introduce risk. And then we give you a very comprehensive report We give you one per database where you can see exactly if we find any high risk or medium risk or low risk. We also give you that across your entire fleet where you can see, hey, across my fleet, I have some high risk. What are those high risks? Which databases are impacted by that risk? And then for each of them, we also give you recommendations on how to remediate those risks. And as I said, we have a very comprehensive list here. But what we also introduced for managing security at scale or compliance at scale more easily is we give you what we call security assessment templates. So we have a template, obviously, that covers all those checks. But I have a lot of customers who are telling me, hey, honestly, this is what I'm using internally, but for my auditors, I need to make sure that my databases are CIS compliant, and I need to provide that to them, right? So we also have other templates that are broken down from the all checks, where you have a template for just CIS checks or CIS relevant checks, one for STIC relevant checks, one for GDPR relevant checks, and then we also have Oracle best practices on top of that that you can leverage here. Once you're using these templates, and what I didn't mention, you can also create your own templates, right? You can also go ahead and say, hey, yes, and mostly we're looking at CIS checks, but maybe there are some additional checks that we have in our list that you also want to apply, or where you have a corporate policy that you need to check those. So you can also create your own templates here out of all the checks that we're delivering. And then once you have those templates, you can apply that to that target group. And then we show you immediately if we find any non-compliant databases with those checks, if we find any checks, any checks that failed in any of the databases. So you see that here immediately. And then you can drill down seeing, hey, which of my databases are not compliant? Which checks did they fail? Or you can also go the other way where you look at, hey, across all my databases, which checks failed, and what is the impact here, which databases, and so on. And here as well, you get then the details of what you can do to remediate the risk. The next feature I would like to talk about is user risk assessment. So here we're checking all the users that you have in your database, and that can be human users, obviously. It can be AI agents. It can be, any type of machine user, so to speak. And what we're doing is we're identifying any highly privileged users. So you see at a glance also which of my users have DBA privileges or audit admin privileges, database vault admin privileges, and so on. But we also give each user what we call a potential user risk, critical, high, medium, low, where we're really checking, what privileges this user has, what roles does this user have, what data can they access? Can they access sensitive data, right? And then we give you this potential user risk. And again, it doesn't mean that this user is very risky, but if that user would get compromised or would get misused, what is the damage they can do to the data that you're storing in your database. And then you can drill down for each of the users. You see exactly, what roles, what privileges these users have. And moreover, you can also see how those privileges were granted. I work a lot with customers, and then sometimes it's like, oh yeah, this user, we need to revoke that certain privilege. And then it's sometimes hard, right? Because there might be a role that was granted or another role, a certain privilege might have been granted by various roles. So DataSafe gives you that insight. You can really drill down and see exactly how a certain privilege was granted, which role, or was it a direct grant, and so on, and you can go from there. A couple other things that we're giving you here, and you see that on top on the graphs, is also we let you know if any of your users need to change their passwords, or if their passwords are already expired. So especially if you think about an application user, if that password has to be changed and you're not taking care of that, then obviously your application won't work. So you need to take care of that. And then the other thing that you see on the right graph is very popular with our users. You can also easily see if you have any dormant accounts, right? So what happens if you have users who hadn't logged in a long time, let's say over a year? Are you typically aware of them? And what we've seen with customers, a lot of times they're not aware of that, right? I worked with a big US company here, and we registered one of their most critical XRCC databases, so cloud customer databases. And then immediately we saw that they had 200 accounts that hadn't logged in over a year, right? And they had no idea about it. So might be a good idea also to do some checks here and then, lock those users out of the database, for instance. The next topic, also relevant for users, obviously, is user activity auditing. So once you know who your users are, if you have highly privileged users, if you have any risky users, or now if you have any AI agents, you might want to track what they're actually doing on your database, right? So with user activity auditing, we first of all give you the option of managing the audit policies that should be enabled on your database, right? Let's say you have highly risk users, you might want to create an audit policy that tracks their activity on the database, or you might want to track activity on very sensitive information that you're storing in your database. For instance, I have a lot of customers who track, any activity, let's say on employees tables or customer tables. And then you can also set up alerts on, hey, if there's any activity on, let's say, the employees table that's not coming from my application, then I want to have an alert, for instance. So we give you the option of creating audit and alert policies. You also can start the audit collection here and centrally store your audit records in DataSafe, meaning, keeping it away from your database. So if any incident happens, nobody can manipulate the audit records on the database, but you have it centrally here. If you have an incident now, all of a sudden you can investigate across your databases here what happened. And for that, we have predefined audit reports. You can also customize your audit reports. We have a whole bunch of audit reports out of the box, but you can always go ahead and make them your own and apply additional filters or whatever you need to look at. And for managing audit policies, we have also introduced something new last year, which is called security policy management. And this is really helping you for managing your audit policies and enforcing them at scale. So what that means is basically you can create a security policy, and we have predefined ones here also in DataSafe, where you can go ahead and say, hey, these are the audit policies that should be active or enforced on this group of target databases, for instance. So you define them once, you give that security policy a name, you define what are the audit policies that should be enforced, and then you deploy that to a target database group. And then we make sure if that audit policy doesn't exist on those databases, we create the audit policies, we're enabling it, and really making sure they're enforced on all the targets where you want to have them enforced. And right now with the security policy, we have the audit policies in there. We will add more, for instance, like alert policies. We're also working on some additional security solutions that we're bringing into DataSafe, if it's database vault, if it's data redaction, and so on. So those also will be able to manage with security policies in the future. Also for auditing, what we have introduced is now you can set your audit retention settings also for a group of targets. So you can define, if you think about the example we had earlier with the mission critical databases. So if you have any databases that have to follow certain regulations, and you say, hey, for these group of targets, I have to keep it for 7 years. You define that here once, you let us know how long you want to keep the audit records online, and then how long you want to keep them offline. You define that here once, and then we'll manage that automatically. If you have development databases, you might set it for your development databases only to 6 months maybe online, and maybe you don't even need them in the offline archive as well. Out of the box, you can store your audit records up to 7 years in DataSafe, so 12 months online and then 6 additional years in the offline storage. We had, I think, 2 or 3 European banks who had to keep them for even 10 years, so that's possible too, but out of the box, you can configure that up to 7 years here. And one thing that is good to know is we don't charge you depending on how long you keep your audit record. So it doesn't matter if you keep them for 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years or 7 years. There is no additional charge here in DataSafe for that. Oops. Then when it comes to, and I think, sorry, I've skipped a slide here by accident. So if we think about sensitive data, obviously we talked about you need to know where sensitive data is stored. So in DataSafe, we have what we call data discovery. We have over 100 sensitive types predefined in DataSafe. where we can scan your entire database for those sensitive types. We then give you what we call a sensitive data model. So we show you exactly in which schema, which table, which column did we find sensitive information, where is that sensitive, what type of sensitive information is stored there. We give you also, how many row counts we found for that data. For instance, if we found a column that looks like, hey, this looks like it would contain sensitive data, but there are no values, and maybe it's not that important, right? In terms of the sensitive types, just to give you some ideas here, so here are some examples of sensitive types that we have predefined. We have 7 different categories of sensitive types: identification, biographic, but also financial information, employment information, and so on, as you can see here. If you have anything like maybe you have a specific, I don't know, company-specific identifier for employees or anything else, you can also enhance this model. You can also create your own sensitive types if necessary. And then once you know where sensitive data is stored, obviously we also want to make sure we're protecting that sensitive data in your non-productive environments, right? It doesn't matter now if you have, environments for, AI workloads or for developing your AI workloads or any other development or testing or training databases. You need to make sure that you're not exposing the actual values from your production databases here. Because let's be honest, typically you take a copy of your production database, right? You let developers onto that system, and you need to make sure you're masking those values before. So here it's really about masking those sensitive information. We have over 50 predefined masking formats here as well that help you with that. We have very, simple ones or very specific ones. Let's say if, masking formats for credit cards, for email addresses, and so on, so that it still looks like a credit card or an email address after masking. We have very generic ones where you can say, hey, just replace the data with a, generic string, or I don't know, fixed strings, random strings, random numbers, and so on. But we also have very complex masking formats that you can use. You can also use user-defined functions if necessary, and so on. And then basically when you have sensitive data discovered, we can create what we call a masking policy out of that. So we know, for each sensitive data that we have discovered, we also know how to mask it. So we're assigning a masking format automatically. You can still go ahead and make changes if you want to, mask it differently. And then basically, once you have a copy of your production database, you let the masking run on that database to secure that data or to protect that data. And then last but not least, we have SQL Firewall. So SQL Firewall, you might be aware of that, is a new feature that we introduced with 26 AI databases. So that's also available in your autonomous 26 AI database. So with SQL Firewall, what we're trying to, or what we're doing here, SQL Firewall helps you prevent, attacks from common database attacks, like if it's SQL injection attacks or credential theft or abuse. And what it does is it basically restricts database access to authorized connections for your users, and then also for to authorize SQL statements. So you can define exactly which statements certain users can execute on the database. And then once you've done that, then you can block or monitor any violations. And again, this is a core capability of the 26 AI database. And what we've done with DataSafe is we gave you super simple management capabilities on top. So you have the UI obviously on top, where you can manage your SQL Firewall policies. It starts with, you can start what we call a SQL collection here. So you start the SQL collection for your user, and then in a protected environment, you go through all the transactions these users should be doing and so on. And then we're collecting all the unique statements this user is allowed to do. You can also see, if there are any new unique statements coming in, and we show you that. And then once you have them all collected, you can then review them. You can see the database connections that we have collected also. So from which client program, client IP address, client operating system user is the database users allowed to connect to the database. So you can define that. You can also add additional application servers, for instance, if they were not part of the test. And then once you've reviewed that, you can then enforce the SQL Firewall policy. And here we have 2 modes that the SQL Firewall offers. You can start with just monitoring that's outside of what you have allowed here, and then see those SQL firewall violations in the log, and then see if you maybe missed certain transactions or so, you can still add them to your allow list. And then once you feel like, yes, we have captured everything, you can then block anything that's outside of these allowed statements or allowed connections and really block anything. So no more SQL injection attacks can happen. No more, credential theft. If I know a user and I'm trying to log on from my personal laptop, that's being blocked. If I try to, execute a statement with a user that I got my hands on, that will be revoked as well or denied as well. And because it's
And
now part of the. Mhm.
sorry, Bettina, there's
Yeah.
a good question exactly on what you were just saying. Someone's
Yeah.
asking whether DataSafe can automatically, by default, detect suspicious user activity and then send alerts and even take additional action.
Yeah. So for SQL Firewall, yes, obviously, because we're just talking about that SQL Firewall, you will see the violations. We have a log where you see all those violations. When it comes to suspicious behavior in general, what you can do is, because we have the audit collection in DataSafe, you can set up those alerts, and we have predefined alerts that you can use. So I think we have like 12 or 13 predefined alerts that you can just say, hey, I want to have those alerts set up for my databases. And you can specify for which databases. And then, yes, you would get an alert in DataSafe, but you can also set up OCI notifications. And you can also configure your own alerts. So you can, for instance, say, hey, if someone accesses let's say the employee table, and that is not my application user, but it's someone else, I want to get an alert or so. So you can set that up as well. I hope that answers the question. Good. And I know this was a very quick run through all these 6 features that we have. But I also want to, kind of close the loop with the target groups that I talked about, right? So if you register a new target database, new target database in DataSafe. So what we're doing first is we're checking immediately if that target database has any conditions that would make it a member of any of the target database groups that you have defined. If that's the case, we're adding it to the target database group. And then also, if you have any security assessment templates applied to a target group, we would apply those checks also for that new target database. If you have security policies set up, which means, I want to enforce certain audit policies for my targets in that group, then we deploy that also automatically. And also, if you set your retention periods for a group of targets, we apply that also automatically for a new target group, target database. So you don't have to, register your target and now you have to configure all of these steps, but those are done automatically. And I have a little demo that shows that here also. So let me run that demo. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding a new target database, and that it's a little bit faster to see. So as you can see here now, I'm adding a new database in the finance compartment. It's called finance_SA. So this database is now being created. Or actually, it's called finance SA, as you can see there. And the database is now active in DataSafe. Now, this is the only thing I've done, but because I used target groups before, now what I see is I have a target group for my finance databases, right? And now I see the finance SA was automatically added to that group. And why was it added? Because if I look at the conditions here, I said every database that's in the finance compartment should be part of this target group. Okay, that's the first thing that happened. Now, because it's part of the target group, also security assessment, I have a security assessment template that I apply to my finance databases. And now I see, okay, they're non-compliant databases, and I see finance SA is automatically included here. There was already done the check for this group, and I see there is a low risk here for my databases, for this new database, and I see the details here and can, look at that and then hopefully remediate the risk here. So that's the other thing that's been done. I also had a security policy that was deployed for my finance databases. So now if I look at the audit policies for this new target here, finance SA, I also see that the policy that I deployed was a corporate policy. So I see now I have an audit policy for login events that was automatically deployed. I have two additional ones here for critical database activity, admin user activity. That's part of my corporate policy that was automatically deployed to my database. And then when it comes to audit retention, so how long do I want to keep my audit records? That was also automatically set now for my database. If I look at the Finance SA database, here I see now it has the retention periods of 12 months online and 36 additional months offline. And then I see that was also configured because I have one for the finance compliance, or I have something that's called the finance compliance profile where I configured that. So once you start using target database groups, a lot of these management that you have to do for your databases will be done automatically, right? Targets will be added to your target database group. Security assessment checks will be done automatically, depending on what assessment template you have deployed. Security policies, so all audit policies will be created and enforced on your database, and then also the retention settings are done automatically. And when we think about AI workloads, obviously, we talk about data save, and I'll come back to data save in a moment here. But if you have any Oracle Cloud database, and most editions qualify here, and autonomous databases, obviously, all these security features that you see listed here are included with your autonomous database, right? If you think about AI workloads, what we talked about in the beginning, they should not have broader database privileges than human users, right? So, and we have existing Oracle database controls that are available for you here as, database vault, label security, data redaction, or so, that continue to play a critical role, right? And now with data save, on top of that, that you can also leverage with your autonomous database, it's also included with your autonomous database, then, that helps you identify, sensitive information, monitor access, and really govern usage at scale for your databases here. When it comes to databases, I mentioned earlier we're supporting all flavors of the Oracle database. Just want to come back to that. So obviously, your autonomous database comes included with DataSafe, right? And that applies to all your Oracle Cloud databases. If it's Exadata, if it's autonomous database, if it's BaseDB, then DataSafe is included with your cloud subscription. If you have any databases, Cloud at Customer, autonomous or Exadata, that is also included with DataSafe. If you have any databases running in our multi-cloud partnerships, Oracle database at AWS, at Azure, or at Google Cloud Platform, then DataSafe is also included for that. And if you have any on-premises databases or databases on compute, you can also leverage DataSafe for managing those databases. So if you have a hybrid landscape, DataSafe can manage that all. There typically is a monthly charge for those databases, but I wanted to let you know we're running a promotion right now. So especially we're seeing, attacks on databases have really increased, especially also with AI-powered attacks. So we decided to make DataSafe available at no additional cost for your on-premises and on-compute databases until end of February of 2027, so next year. So you have 8-9 months now where you can also leverage your DataSafe for your on-premises databases if you have hybrid landscapes, for instance. Good. If you want to learn more about DataSafe and especially also how to manage, security at scale and the target groups and everything I talked about, there is a blog that I published last year talking about simplifying database security compliance at scale with DataSafe. So that goes also through a lot of the things that we discussed today. If you want to try out DataSafe, we have a really good live lab called the Get Started with Oracle DataSafe Fundamentals. That really lets you try out all the 6 features. So even SQL Firewall, so we're using a 26 AI database if you want to run it in our sandbox environment, where you can also try out SQL Firewall here, see how that works. We have sensitive data loaded, example data into that database, so you can do sensitive data discovery, you can do data masking. We have a few risks also configured in that database, so you can also really try security assessment. You can set a baseline. We let you introduce an additional risk and then show you, hey, there's a drift, so you can see that. User assessment, you can check, how privileges grants were granted to your database. We show you how to configure auditing, and then also, how to use those audit reports, maybe create your own audit report. So very comprehensive LiveLabs that you can try out. And then also, if you don't want to use the UI, but you also want to see, hey, how do I work with the interfaces, right? If I want to use REST API, CLI commands to leverage the data safe features, we also have a LiveLab for that. That gives you some examples on how to work with our interfaces. Good. If you want to get started, it's as simple as, hey, register your database in DataSafe. And for autonomous databases, it's super simple. On the autonomous console, you see a button that says register with DataSafe, or you come to our console and we have a wizard that guides you through it, especially if your autonomous database runs in a private VCN, or, you cannot access it, what is it called, securely from everywhere. We also guide you through setting up the security rules, so that it allows DataSafe to communicate with your database and so on. So I can really recommend the wizard that we have on our page. You go to that wizard, you select your autonomous database from the dropdown, and then we'll configure everything for you. Once you've done that, we automatically run security and user assessment for you, so you can look at, any security findings we've done, any high risk, medium risk, or low risk that we found in the configuration of your database. We show you, who are your highly privileged users, etc. Then the next step would be check for compliance, look at the assessment templates, apply the ones that are relevant for you, maybe just a CIS one, maybe you have one that you want to set up specifically for your company, or you stay with the all checks. And then you can review compliance across your target or your database fleet. Then you can start the audit collection if you want. You can schedule audit reports, either the predefined ones that we have, or you can also create your own ones. You can set up alerts, as we talked about. And then also you can, next step would be, you can really enforce your policies. So you can then decide which are the audit policies that should be active on all my databases, and set that up. And then if you have sensitive data that you want to look at, you can then discover sensitive data, mask sensitive data in your non-production environments. And then also if you have 26 AI database, and you can also start enforcing the SQL Firewall policies. So that was kind of a quick run through. So thank you so much for all your time and interest. And I'll stop here for a second. And Marcus and team, are there any open questions that we should address?
Thank you very much, Bettina. Thank you. Appreciate it. So, all right, guys. So time for questions. There are a few questions in Q&A. Can you take a look, Bettina? Maybe you can read through them and go and answer them. Appreciate it.
Can data safe masking be done in flight from an unmasked source to a new masked target, or does it do masking in place? Yeah, it does it in place. So you would typically what you would do is you would create your copy of your database and then run masking in that copy of your database, typically before you let any developers or any users onto that database. Is there separate documentation for implementing it on a CDB with PDBs? It's the same way. So what we're doing is, right now, I have to say, you would register your PDBs separately in DataSafe, and you can also register your CDB in DataSafe. So CDB, obviously, you typically don't have data, so you wouldn't use sensitive data discovery or data masking with your CDBs. You would only use it with the PDB. But it's actually a great question, Rachel, because we also have something coming up pretty soon this year for Exadata integration. So if it's ExaCS, if it's Exascale, if it's Exa Clouded Customer, where basically you can let us know that all your databases in a CDB, so all existing PDBs, all future PDBs should be registered in DataSafe. That is just a single check mark you have to set in the database console. And then we will register your databases automatically. So that is a new feature that's coming up most likely this summer. So that makes it so much easier, right? And once that is available, obviously you will find that also in the documentation. You basically opt in once for DataSafe on the CDB level, and then we'll take care of registering that CDB and all the PDBs. What is inside the black box with DataSafe? Is it agent-based? Where are files located? So we're storing customer information. So basically, we're just storing, metadata about your databases, right? Metadata about your schemas, your tables, your columns, and so on. We're storing metadata about your users and so on. And that is stored there is a dedicated, basically behind the scenes is a dedicated autonomous database for each customer environment. So in your tenancy in each region, there is a dedicated autonomous database where we're storing that metadata information. Is it agent-based? So obviously, we're also looking into Gen AI and using agents. So we're working on that. So right now, it's not agent-based, but that is on our roadmap where we will leverage, agents as well in DataSafe. And we'll talk more about that around AI World, where we show more details on what we're doing there and we'll show demos, etc. Good. Let's see. It looks like that was the open questions. Let's see if there's anything else coming.
Yes. There's another one.
XSCS CDBs. Can common CDB user access be traced and as sysdba? So C hash users, yes, can be traced also if you register your CDB in DataSafe. The operating system authentication, so if that app happens, so to speak, outside the database, then it cannot be traced, right? So DataSafe only connects to your database. So whatever happens in the database, we can track with audit records. Whatever happens, so to speak, outside of the database, we cannot track because we don't have access to your operating system. I hope that answers it.
All right. Excellent. Okay. Good. Excellent. That's great. Thank you, Bettina. Thank you very much.
Does it support post-quantum cryptography? So DataSafe is not really doing any cryptography, right? One of the things that's also on our roadmap that I can talk about, we will do so we're introducing in DataSafe what we call a crypto assessment. So right now, if I work with customers and I ask them, hey, what are you actually using, right? In all your databases, what encryption methods or any crypto and so on, it's like, yeah, good question. It differs from each database and so on. So we are introducing a crypto assessment in DataSafe also this year, where we give you an overview exactly of what you're using. It will also include on, hey, is this quantum ready? Is it really, secure for post-quantum and so on? So it will also give you kind of a rating on, hey, this looks, it's really not quantum ready. You need to do something. You need to improve something. So that is coming where we give you an overview across, all your databases and what you're using there. Wait, are you saying that DataSafe is not? No. That's not what I'm saying. DataSafe, obviously, yes. We're storing all our data that we're storing, obviously, is encrypted, right? So, as I said, we're relying on the autonomous database here. So those are encrypted by default, obviously. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. By default, so autonomous database has every security, capability right on, and some of them you cannot even turn them off, right? So encryption is one of those. But
and I mean, on a side note, because I mentioned that we're using autonomous databases, I think we're one of the bigger or biggest autonomous users internally, so to speak, right? So we definitely use autonomous a lot. We have, I don't know how many thousands of autonomous databases in our environment. Yeah. Good. Yeah, the first crypto question that I was more thinking about your target databases that you have access or registered in DataSafe, obviously. Yeah. Good. Looks like questions are dying down. Good.
Yeah, so we're still here, guys. If you still have questions, just type them in. I can take a look at them afterwards and take them to Bettina. Thank you, Bettina, very much for the presentation. And then basically, for links, I'm going to share again the links that I shared before with you guys at the beginning in the chat. Okay. So those are for our, LinkedIn and Slack and how to find us and ask your questions as well. And that's it. So, if you go back to the site that I shared, the oracle.com/go/ADB Learning Lounge, you're going to find this session and all the previous sessions, all the recordings and links that folks have shared with us. Okay. All right. So I'll there's one more question there. I'll directly take that question and get it to Bettina. Thank you very much. And I'll leave you guys to a little bit of an exit. Thank you again. A little countdown here, but again, keep typing your questions. I'm going to make sure that we get an answer to you. Okay. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thank you, Bettina.
Thanks for having me, Marcus.